The little poor girl had no idea that the 4 abandoned babies she found in the trash would connect her to the richest man in the country who was desperately searching for them. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain fell mercilessly on that cold autumn night, transforming the city streets into dark, icy rivers. Emily Wilson, barely 8 years old, clutched a wet plastic bag against her chest with some crushed cans she had managed to collect before the storm began. Her black, long and tangled hair stuck to her thin face as she searched for a dry place to spend the night. It had been almost 3 years since Emily lived on the streets. 3 years since she ran away from her 5th foster home, where screams were more frequent than meals. 3 long years learning how to survive alone in a city that barely noticed her existence. In the school of life, Emily had graduated with honors. She knew which alleys were safe to sleep in, which garbage bins might contain food that was still good, and most importantly, which people should be avoided at all costs. Cans, bottles, anything I can sell, Emily murmured to herself, her small voice almost inaudible under the noise of the rain, as she checked another dumpster at the end of a dark alley. The money from recycling was barely enough to buy a bread and a glass of milk on good days. Today, with this storm, the streets were deserted and her stomach ached, reminding her that the last piece of bread she had eaten had been yesterday morning. Her small hands trembled not only from cold, but also from hunger. With time, Emily had learned to deal with hunger. The sharp pain she felt at the beginning had transformed into a constant numbness. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever feel her stomach really full again. While Emily was rummaging through the last dumpster in that alley, a different sound caught her attention. It wasn't the hungry meow of a stray cat, nor the typical noise of rats looking for food scraps. It was a sound that awakened something deep and almost forgotten inside her, the weak cry of a baby. Emily froze. Maybe it was just her imagination playing a trick on her. Street children learned early not to meddle where they weren't called. Other people's problems usually meant more problems for themselves, but then she heard it again and again. In fact, it seemed there was more than one cry. Who would be out with babies in this weather, she whispered, looking around the empty alley. Guided by the weak cries, Emily approached a large dumpster leaning against the wall. Carefully, she lifted the heavy lid and pointed the small battery-powered flashlight she carried to look inside. What she saw made her let out a muffled cry of surprise. Inside a large, torn garbage bag, partially covered by wet newspapers and food scraps, were 4 identical little faces looking at her. 4 babies, perfectly identical, with the most impressive green eyes Emily had ever seen. They didn't seem to be more than 3 months old, and despite the place where they were found, they wore clothes that seemed expensive, now dirty and damp. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with shock. She looked up and to the sides, expecting to see some adult, perhaps the mother of the babies, returning. But the alley remained deserted, with only the sound of rain hitting the roofs and trash bins. With trembling hands, Emily carefully moved aside the wet newspapers. The babies were lying on a small blanket that, although dirty, seemed to have been expensive. Among the folds of the blanket, she found an envelope protected by plastic. Curious, she opened it with difficulty, but her limited reading skills only allowed her to understand a few words: danger, protect, and forgive. Emily waited 20 minutes, soaked by the rain, observing the alley. Nobody appeared. The babies kept crying, now louder, probably hungry and cold. The girl felt a lump in her heart seeing those little creatures abandoned like trash. She knew well what it was like to be discarded, to be treated as something worthless. "I can't leave them here," Emily finally decided, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. "I'm not going to do that to them." Making a decision that would change everything, Emily carefully took the 4 babies out of the dumpster. They were surprisingly heavy for her thin arms, but desperation and compassion gave her strengths she didn't know she possessed. She placed the small bundles inside her torn coat as best she could to protect them from the rain. While looking at those four innocent faces, something awakened within Emily, a truth that she would share many years later. Nobody is so small or insignificant that they cannot make a difference. Sometimes, the hands most capable of changing the world are exactly those that seem most fragile. "Let's go home," she whispered to them, knowing that her home was nothing more than an abandoned theater 6 blocks away. "I'll take care of you." As Emily walked slowly through the dark streets, fighting against the wind and rain to protect the babies, she didn't know that just 12 blocks away, Michael Thompson, 34 years old, the youngest and richest businessman in the country, was offering a reward of $15 million for any information about his kidnapped daughters. And among the shadows, a few meters from where Emily found the babies, a figure watched from the window of a black car with tinted windows, a cold smile forming on his lips. The game had just begun. The abandoned theater that Emily called home was in the old city center. A worn-out and half-fallen sign still showed its name, Grand Palace Theater. Decades ago, it had been an elegant place where the city's elite attended plays and concerts. Now, with its peeling walls and torn seats, it served as a shelter for rats, pigeons, and an 8-year-old girl. Emily had discovered the place more than a year ago when she fled from a gang of older boys who wanted to steal what little she had. A back door, half hidden by overgrown bushes, gave access to the basement and from there to the main stage. Few people knew about that path, and Emily had done everything she could to keep the place secret. The theater had never seemed so alive as now. Emily entered through the back door, carefully climbing the narrow staircase that led to the backstage, trying to maintain balance with 4 babies in her arms. Reaching the stage, she placed the small bundles in the corner she called her room, a space she had organized with all the soft things she could find. Pieces of old curtains, abandoned coats, and a surprisingly clean cushion that she had rescued from the trash of a mansion months earlier. "You need names," Emily whispered, studying each little face in the dim light coming through the broken skylights in the roof. "You're so cute. You look like little flowers." The girl thought for a moment, remembering the storybooks she used to browse in a bookstore where they let her stay when it rained hard. There was a book about a magical garden full of enchanted flowers. She had always wanted to have that book. "I'll call you Lily, Rose, Violet, and Poppy," she decided, touching each baby's forehead gently as she spoke their new names. "Flower names for my little flowers." Each baby seemed to respond to her voice differently. Lily, with a small crescent moon-shaped mark behind her ear, seemed the most attentive, her green eyes following Emily's every movement. Rose cried louder when she was hungry and took longer to calm down after eating, as if she had a stronger personality. Violet was the quietest, observing everything around her with curious eyes that seemed to understand more than should be possible for such a small baby. And Poppy had the sweetest smile that appeared even during sleep, and her grip was surprisingly strong when she held Emily's finger. The hungry cries of the babies echoed in the vast, empty space of the theater. Emily checked her pockets. She had exactly $16.25, all the money she owned in the world. Money she had collected over weeks by selling cans and bottles, and sometimes helping Mr. Davis from the corner store unload boxes. Emily knew that she couldn't let the babies cry from hunger, but she also knew that she couldn't simply appear in a store with 4 identical babies. People would ask questions, call the authorities, and both she and the babies would end up in the system, a place Emily had sworn never to return to. After thinking for a few minutes, she took an old shopping cart that she had found and adapted to carry her things. Lining it with the cleanest rags she had, she placed the 4 babies inside, covering them with a piece of dark canvas she used to protect herself from the rain. With her heart racing, she pushed the cart through dark alleys to the convenience store 5 blocks away. Mr. Davis's store was one of the few that remained open late. Emily had a silent agreement with him. Sometimes she helped him stack boxes or sweep the sidewalk, and in return, he pretended not to see when she took a very ripe fruit or yesterday's bread. Mr. Davis was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a kind face marked by deep wrinkle. An immigrant from a distant state, he understood what it was like to struggle to survive. When Emily entered the store, leaving the cart strategically positioned outside where she could see it through the window, he welcomed her with a tired smile. "Emily, you shouldn't be out in this storm. You're soaked, child." "Good evening, Mr. Davis," she replied, trying to appear casual while choosing 4 small bottles, the cheapest powdered milk she found, and some cloth diapers. She couldn't afford the disposable ones. "Mr. Davis observed with curiosity as she placed the items on the counter, along with all her money. "Is this for your family, Emily?" he asked kindly. Emily hesitated. Lying didn't come naturally to her, even after years on the streets. "It's for my mother's babies," she invented, avoiding looking at him. "She is sick today and sent me to buy." Mr. Davis examined the items and then looked at Emily for a long moment. His wise eyes seemed to see through the lie, but instead of asking more questions, he added a small jar of fruit puree and a package of disposable diapers to her items. "I won't charge you for the extras," he said softly. "Tell your mother that if she needs more help, she can come see me." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Kindness sometimes hurt more than cruelty because it reminded her of what she never had. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," she managed to say, taking the bag of purchases. Back at the theater, Emily faced the challenge of feeding 4 babies with only 2 hands. She had to create a system. She prepared bottles using water she heated in cans over candles she had taken from a donation box in the local church, silently promising God that she would return them someday. "This is how it works," Emily explained to the babies as if they could understand. "First, we feed Lily and Rose because you are the loudest. Then it's Violet and Poppy's turn. And tomorrow, we change the order. To be fair." She propped 2 bottles between cushions while holding the other 2, alternating between the babies as they drank. It was exhausting, but Emily felt a strange satisfaction every time a baby finished her bottle and let out a small burp when she put them to burp. That first night, Emily didn't sleep. Sitting on the theater floor, watching over her new charges, she sang softly the lullabies she vaguely remembered from a time before foster homes. Maybe her own mother had sung to her, or maybe they were just fragments of invented memories to fill the void. "Sleep well, my little flowers," she whispered in the darkness. "Tomorrow will be a better day. I'll take care of you. No one will hurt you while I'm here, I promise." Outside, the rain continued to fall, and in the night sky not even the stars were visible. But inside that abandoned theater, among dust and cobwebs, a small miracle was happening. 5 girls discarded by the world were finding a family in each other. Emily didn't know how long she could keep the babies safe, or how she would get enough food for everyone in the coming days. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel completely alone. Looking at the sleeping faces, so small and trusting, she made a silent promise. "I won't abandon you. Never." In the penthouse of one of the tallest buildings in the city, Michael Thompson was experiencing his worst nightmare. At 34 years old, he had built a technological empire that revolutionized the global pharmaceutical market. Thompson Innovations was known for developing affordable medicines for diseases that were previously treated only with expensive drugs. His most recent development, a revolutionary cancer treatment that cost 1/10 the price of conventional therapies, had been announced just 3 days before the kidnapping of his daughters. Michael's office, normally impeccably organized, now looked like a military operations center. Maps of the city covered the walls, police reports were scattered over all the tables, and an army of professionals, police officers, federal agents, private detectives, and security specialists worked 24 hours a day. Michael hadn't slept for 72 hours. His face, which used to appear on magazine covers as an example of young success and innovation, was now pale and gaunt, with deep dark circles and an incipient beard that had never been seen in his public appearances. His designer suit was wrinkled after days without change, and his hair, normally well-groomed, fell disheveled over his forehead. He walked back and forth in front of the huge windows that offered a panoramic view of the illuminated city. Somewhere in that labyrinth of streets and buildings, his daughters had disappeared, and all his money and power seemed useless. "Michael, you need to rest a little," Sarah, his personal assistant for 6 years, spoke softly, placing a cup of strong coffee in front of him. "You won't help anyone if you faint from exhaustion." Michael didn't even look at the coffee. His eyes were fixed on the 4 photos on his desk, his daughters, born just 3 months ago. Identical quadruplets, a phenomenon so rare that doctors had been amazed. His little miracles, as he called them. Each with their green eyes, an inheritance from their late mother. "How can I rest, Sarah?" he asked, his voice hoarse from fatigue. 3 days have passed. 3 days that they are out there. With whom? In what conditions? Are they being fed? Are they cold? Are they crying for me? Before Sarah could respond, the door to the office opened, and Agent Miller from the FBI entered, followed by Detective Johnson. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk," said the agent, her tone professional, but with a note of urgency that made Michael tense. "Have you found them?" he asked, his heart accelerating. "Not yet," replied Detective Johnson, placing a folder on the table. "But we have new information that completely changes our approach to this case." Michael sat down, preparing himself for what would come next. "Tell me everything." Agent Miller opened the folder, revealing several security camera photos. "We analyzed the hospital footage again. The person who took your daughters from the maternity ward knew exactly how to avoid most of the cameras. They wore hospital clothes and masks, moving like someone who knew the place well. This suggests it was an inside job," completed the detective. "Someone with detailed knowledge, not only of the hospital, but possibly of your personal routine." Michael felt a chill. "Are you saying someone close to me is involved?" The agent hesitated for a moment. "Mr. Thompson, we need to ask, who would benefit from your daughter's disappearance? Who would have motives to harm you in this way?" Michael passed his hand over his face, trying to order his thoughts. "I have competitors, of course. The new cancer treatment we launched will affect many large pharmaceutical companies, but from there to kidnapping babies, that's too monstrous." "We're investigating that line too," confirmed Johnson. "But generally, in cases like this, the motive is more personal than professional." At that moment, Sarah interrupted. "Mr. Thompson, your brother Richard has arrived. Should I ask him to wait?" Michael shook his head. "No, let him in. Richard has been helping me coordinate the searches since day one." Richard Thompson entered the office with the same confident posture as always. 5 years older than Michael, he had the same strong features, but where Michael exuded an innovative and accessible energy, Richard had always seemed more calculating and distant. As the financial director of Thompson Innovations, he was known for his coldness in negotiations and for always prioritizing profits. "Any news?" asked Richard, placing his hand on his brother's shoulder in a gesture of apparent solidarity. Michael noticed that, unlike him, Richard seemed perfectly presentable, as if he had just come from a business meeting. It didn't even seem like his brother was going through the worst crisis of his life. "We were discussing new lines of investigation," replied Michael, studying his brother's face. "Richard, do you remember anyone suspicious at the hospital in the days before the kidnapping? Anyone who seemed out of place?" Richard frowned slightly. "Nothing specific. But I was more focused on dealing with the press after the treatment announcement. You know how the stocks of the big pharmaceutical companies crashed when we announced the new drug." Agent Miller carefully observed the interaction between the brothers. "Mr. Richard, where were you on the night of the kidnapping?" Richard slowly turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I was in a meeting with investors until late. Then I went home." "Why?" "Standard procedure," she replied softly. "We're verifying the whereabouts of all people close to the family." Michael suddenly stood up. "I'm going to make a public announcement, offer a reward, $15 million, no questions asked, for whoever brings my daughters back." Richard seemed surprised. 15 million? That's Excessive, Michael. It will attract all kinds of opportunists and charlatans. We'll waste time and resources verifying false leads. I don't care, said Michael firmly. They're my daughters. I would spend to the last cent if it would bring them back. As the team began to organize the press conference, Michael didn't notice the look his brother exchanged with someone outside the office, nor did he hear the phone call that Richard made minutes later, away from everyone. "We have a problem," said Richard quietly on the phone. "He's going to offer a huge reward. The situation is getting out of control. Expand the search and make sure there are no witnesses. This must be resolved before the press turns it into a national circus." On the third day of caring for 4 babies, Emily was more exhausted than ever in her life. Her nights were constantly interrupted by cries of hunger or wet diapers. Her days were filled with an exhausting routine of preparing bottles, washing cloth diapers in the abandoned theater bathroom, and trying to keep the babies warm as the autumn grew increasingly colder. Mr. Davis continued to be her salvation. At each visit, he silently added more items to her purchase without charging for them. An extra jar of puree, more diapers, a clean blanket. He never asked too many questions, but his eyes showed that he knew the sick mom story was a lie. Yet he helped. "You know, Emily," he said one morning as she was buying more powdered milk, "if you really need help, you can trust me. I have a niece your age. I know how difficult it is for children." Emily just nodded, quickly gathering her purchases. Trust didn't come easily to someone who grew up on the streets. Even Mr. Davis's kindness sometimes made her uncomfortable, as if she was waiting for the moment when he would ask for something in return. That afternoon, as Emily approached the store to buy more supplies, she saw something that froze her blood. 2 men in expensive suits were talking to Mr. Davis, showing him photos. Through the window, she saw when his eyes widened in recognition before instinctively looking toward the door, toward the place where Emily usually entered. The girl quickly hid behind a garbage bin, her heart beating so hard that it seemed it would jump out of her mouth. The men left the store moments later, scanning the street with a type of efficiency that Emily immediately recognized. They weren't ordinary police. There was something different about them, something more dangerous. The men got into a black car with tinted windows parked across the street, very similar to the car she had seen on the night she found the babies. Emily waited until the car turned the corner before running through alleys and narrow passages, taking a different path back to the theater. Throughout the journey, she constantly looked back, making sure no one was following her. Years of living on the streets had given her a 6th sense for danger, and all her instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. Back at the theater, she found the babies sleeping peacefully, exhausted after a busy morning. Emily couldn't help but smile when she saw them. In just 3 days, each already showed distinct personalities. "You're safe," she whispered, gently touching each little face. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But as she prepared the bottles for the next feeding, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the men in suits. Who were they? What did they want? Were they looking for the babies? Or was it just a coincidence? Her answer came sooner than expected. While feeding Violet that evening, Emily heard something that made her heart stop. Footsteps in the upper part of the theater, on the old balcony. Careful, methodical footsteps of someone who wasn't just passing by, but methodically searching. With her heart racing, Emily placed Violet with her sisters and ran to turn off the candle that illuminated her corner. In the darkness, she could hear better. There were at least 2 people moving carefully on the balcony, using powerful flashlights to illuminate the space below. Come on," Emily whispered desperately, taking the 4 babies and placing them in a large bag she had adapted with handles. It was heavy, but it was the only way to carry them all quickly. Behind the old curtains of the stage, Emily had discovered a small storage space accessible through a maintenance door, a place where they once kept lighting equipment. It was cramped and dusty, but perfect for hiding. She had barely entered the hiding place when she heard footsteps on the stage. Through a small crack in the wall, she observed 2 men, the same ones from the store, sweeping the place with their flashlights, illuminating the corner she had prepared so carefully for the babies. "They've been here," said one of the men, picking up a still warm bottle. "Recently, the shopkeeper's information was correct. The girl can't have gone far with 4 babies," replied the other, speaking through a radio device attached to his wrist. "Expand the search perimeter. Check the neighboring buildings. Remember that we want the targets unharmed." "And the girl?" asked the first. There was a tense moment of silence before the second man answered. "The orders are clear, no witnesses." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. They weren't just looking for the babies, they wanted to eliminate her too. But why? If they were the police or social services, they would just be trying to take them all to a shelter. These men were different, dangerous. One of the men approached the curtains, the flashlight dangerously close to the hiding place where Emily crouched with the babies. By some miracle, the 4 little ones remained silent, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. "Sector 3 to base," the man's radio suddenly crackled. "We have police patrols responding to a call about suspicious activity in the area. Abort and regroup at point B." The men exchanged looks before quickly heading toward the exit. "We'll continue tomorrow," one said. "They can't have gone far." Emily waited 15 more minutes after the sounds of footsteps had completely disappeared before leaving the hiding place. Her whole body was shaking, not only from the weight of the babies, but from the terror of what she had just heard. She knew she couldn't stay there. The theater was no longer safe. But where to go? Who could help a street child with 4 babies, pursued by mysterious men who wanted to kill her? It was then that Emily remembered Mrs. Thompson. The elderly woman lived in a small apartment in the building adjacent to the theater. Once, Emily had been caught stealing apples from her window, but instead of calling the police or yelling at her, Mrs. Thompson had offered more fruit and invited the girl to come in and eat a hot bowl of soup. Emily had been too afraid to accept at that moment, but now she had no choice. With the babies firmly pressed against her chest, Emily left the theater through the secret passage at the back, looking in all directions before crossing the street to Mrs. Thompson's building. The night was cold, and a fine drizzle was beginning to fall again, like an omen of the dangers that were still to come. "Good heavens," whispered Mrs. Thompson when she opened the door and found Emily standing there, soaked and carrying 4 babies. "Child, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" The elderly woman was small and bent by the weight of age, but her dark eyes still sparkled with intelligence and strength. Her apartment, although modest, was impeccably clean and cozy, decorated with family photos and small ornaments collected over decades. The smell of fresh bread and some kind of stew filled the air, making Emily's stomach involuntarily rumble. "Please, Mrs. Thompson," pleaded Emily, her voice almost vanishing from fear. "They're after us. Dangerous men. I have nowhere to go." The elderly woman didn't hesitate for a second. She opened the door completely and gestured for Emily to enter, quickly checking the empty hallway before closing and securing the door. "Put those babies on my bed," she instructed, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'll heat some milk and prepare something for you to eat. You look like you haven't eaten in days, child." With skillful hands, despite her arthritis, Mrs. Thompson helped Emily arrange the 4 babies on her large antique bed, using pillows to prevent them from rolling. She examined each baby with expert eyes, touching their foreheads, checking their reflexes, like a mother who had raised many children. "These babies," said Mrs. Thompson finally, looking at Emily seriously, "are not ordinary babies. Look at the clothes, even after days under your care. And 4 identical babies. That's very rare. Someone important must be looking for them." "Bad men are looking for them," replied Emily, trembling as she sat at the kitchen table and accepted a cup of hot chocolate. "They came into the theater. They had guns, Mrs. Thompson. And I heard them talking. They want the babies, but they said they can't leave witnesses." Her voice faded on the last word. The elderly woman's face hardened. "Witnesses? They're talking about you, a child." She shook her head indignantly. What kind of monsters would be capable of that? Emily bit into a piece of warm bread that Mrs. Thompson had placed in front of her, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. It was the first warm, fresh food she had eaten in days. "I think we should watch the news," said Mrs. Thompson thoughtfully. "If these babies are so special, there must be something about them on television." She turned on her small TV in the living room, tuning to the local news channel. They didn't have to wait long. The main news of the night was about the disappearance of businessman Michael Thompson's daughters and the astronomical reward offered for any information. Emily almost choked on the bread when she saw the man's face on the screen. Even emaciated by fatigue and worry, the resemblance between him and the babies was undeniable. The same deep green eyes, the same face shape. "My daughters were kidnapped from Memorial Hospital 3 days ago," Michael was saying, his voice broken by emotion. "Lily, Rose, Violet and Poppy, identical quadruplets just 3 months old. They are innocent and need special care." Emily froze when she heard the names. They were exactly the same names she had given them. "I'm offering $15 million for information that leads to their safe return," continued Michael. "I won't ask questions. I just want my daughters back home, where they belong." When the camera showed a wider view of the scene, Emily noticed a man standing just behind Michael, similar to him, but with colder eyes that didn't match the expression of concern on his face. "That's the father," whispered Emily, pointing at the screen. "He gave them the same names I chose." "How is that possible?" Mrs. Thompson studied the screen carefully. "Destiny, perhaps, or instinct." She frowned, looking more closely. "But look at the other man. The one standing behind him. His eyes don't match his face. My grandmother always used to say, 'Trust the eyes, not the smile.' That man is not really concerned." Before Emily could respond, a loud knock on the door froze them both. Mrs. Thompson signaled Emily to remain silent and walked to the door, looking through the peephole. Her face paled when she saw 2 men in suits, the same ones Emily had described. "Back door!" whispered Mrs. Thompson urgently. "Through Mrs. Wilkins' apartment at the end of the hall. She always leaves the back door unlocked for when her grandson comes to visit her late at night." While the knocks on the door grew louder and more insistent, Emily collected the babies as Mrs. Thompson quickly filled a bag with powdered milk, diapers, and other necessities. "Go to the police," instructed the elderly woman, putting her own warm coat over Emily's shoulders. "Not to the neighborhood precinct. They might be watching it. Go directly to police headquarters downtown. Ask for Detective Johnson. Tell him that Eleanor Thompson sent you and that it's about the Thompson babies." "Come with us, Mrs. Thompson," pleaded Emily, holding the wrinkled hand of the lady. "They might hurt you." Mrs. Thompson smiled sadly, caressing Emily's face. "I'm too old to run, dear. I'll delay them here. Don't worry about me. I've already lived my life. These little ones need to live theirs." With tears running down her face, Emily escaped through the back door, just as she heard the front door being broken down. Mrs. Thompson's indignant shouts followed her down the hallway, the brave distraction of an elderly woman buying precious time for 5 girls to escape death. "Let's go, my little flowers," Emily whispered to the babies as she quickly descended the service stairs, trying not to think about what might happen to Mrs. Thompson. "We are going to find your father and end this once and for all." Reaching downtown with 4 babies seemed an impossible mission. Emily couldn't use public transportation, where she would be immediately noticed. All the taxis she tried to stop passed by when they saw a dirty child carrying 4 babies. The city, which Emily knew so well during the day, seemed like a threatening labyrinth at night. The improvised bag that Mrs. Thompson had prepared to carry the babies was becoming increasingly heavy, and Emily's arms ached with the effort. After almost 2 hours of walking through narrow alleys and side streets, always alert to black cars or men in suits, Emily finally reached Central Park, the heart of the city. Exhausted and desperate, she sat on an isolated bench, trying to decide what to do. The babies were restless, hungry, and uncomfortable, their soft cries beginning to attract curious looks from the few nocturnal passers-by. Emily prepared bottles using water from a public fountain and the powdered milk that Mrs. Thompson had put in the bag. Her hands trembled from fatigue and fear as she fed Lily and Rose, then Violet and Poppy. "Just a little more," she promised the little ones. "We'll find your daddy, and you'll be safe." That's when she saw them, two police officers patrolling the park. Emily's instinct, developed after years on the streets, was to flee. Police usually meant trouble for kids like her. Interrogations, social services, back to the foster system. But Mrs. Thompson had told her to seek the police, and the baby's safety was more important than her own fear. Gathering all her courage, Emily approached the police officers, the babies in her arms. "Please," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "I need to find Detective Johnson. It's about the Thompson babies." The officers, an older man and a young woman, exchanged surprised looks before observing more closely the 4 identical babies that Emily was carrying. The female officer immediately spoke on her radio, requesting reinforcements, while her colleague knelt to be at Emily's height. "You're safe now, little one," he said kindly. "You did the right thing by looking for us. We'll take care of you and the babies." In minutes, the park was surrounded by patrol cars, federal agents, and private security guards. Emily was led to an ambulance, where paramedics checked the babies and herself, while detectives asked questions that she answered with hesitation, still afraid they might separate her from the babies. She kept them alive and healthy for 3 days, alone, on the streets. Emily heard a doctor comment with admiration. "Incredible. The babies are in excellent condition, considering the circumstances," agreed another paramedic. "Well fed, clean, no signs of neglect." Emily felt strangely proud of these comments, but her attention was soon drawn to the street opposite, where she saw something that froze her. Men in suits identical to those who had been chasing them were observing from afar, their faces cold and calculating. This wasn't over. "We need to go," she said urgently to the police officer at her side. "Those men, the ones watching us from across the street, are the same ones who were chasing us. They want to hurt the babies, and me too." The officer looked in the indicated direction and immediately spoke on his radio. Several police officers moved toward the men, who quickly disappeared into the crowd that was beginning to form around the scene. "Don't worry, Emily," assured the officer. "We'll take you to a safe place now. Mr. Thompson has already been informed and is on his way to the hospital." Hospital. The word awakened a new fear in Emily. Hospitals meant authorities, difficult questions, perhaps separation from the babies. But looking at the tired faces of her little charges, she knew they needed proper medical care, a warm and safe place, and their real father. "Can I stay with them?" Emily asked quietly as they were led to an ambulance. "Just until we're sure they're okay. They trust me." The officer smiled kindly. "Of course you can, honey. You saved their lives. No one will separate you now." As the ambulance made its way through the night traffic of the city, sirens on, Emily held Poppy's little hand and thought about Mrs. Thompson. Had she managed to escape the men? Was she safe? The guilt of leaving her behind weighed on her heart, mixing with the relief of finally having found help for the babies. "We're going home, my little flowers," whispered Emily. "You're going to meet your daddy. He seems nice. He loves you." Silent tears ran down Emily's dirty face as she struggled with conflicting feelings. Joy at having kept the babies safe, fear about what would happen to her now, and a deep sadness at the thought that she would soon have to say goodbye to the 4 little ones who, in just 3 days, had become her family. The hospital room looked like a fortress. Federal agents guarded every entrance. Security cameras monitored all corridors, and a specialized medical team cared for the babies. Emily sat uncomfortably in a chair too big for her, in the corner of the room, watching as doctors and nurses examined her little charges. Despite extreme fatigue, Emily rejected all offers to rest in another room. She wouldn't leave the babies alone until she had absolute certainty that they were safe. "They are perfectly healthy," finally announced the chief physician after thorough examinations. "Well-nourished, hydrated, with no sign of mistreatment. In fact, considering the circumstances, they are in surprisingly good condition." Emily felt a wave of pride hearing this. She had done her best with the few resources she had. The door to the room opened, and Michael Thompson entered hastily. In person, he seemed even more exhausted than on television, with deep shadows under his eyes and a pale face of worry. But the moment his eyes fell on the 4 babies, a transformation occurred. His face lit up with a love so pure and intense that Emily felt a tug at her heart. "My little ones," he whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "My princesses." Michael approached each hospital crib slowly, gently touching the face of each daughter, checking tiny fingers, counting breaths as if he couldn't believe they were real. Tears flowed freely down his face as he kissed each one, whispering their names. It was only after a few minutes in this emotional reunion that Michael finally noticed Emily sitting quietly in the corner, observing everything with tired, attentive eyes. "You," he said softly, approaching her. "You saved them." Emily shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I found them in the trash. I couldn't leave them there." Michael knelt in front of her, coming to her level. His eyes, identical to the baby's, studied the girl's dirty, tired face. "The police told me what you did," he said, his voice full of emotion. "How you cared for them alone, on the streets. How you fed them and protected them. How you fled from armed men to keep them safe." Emily didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to receiving praise. Her life on the streets was invisible to most people. "Anyone would have done that," she finally murmured. "No," Michael disagreed, shaking his head. "Not anyone. You're special, Emily. You saved my daughters when all my resources couldn't find them." Before Emily could respond, Detective Johnson entered the room, his face serious. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk," he said, then noticed Emily. "Perhaps in private." "No," Michael responded firmly. "Whatever it is, it can be said in front of Emily. She has earned that right." Johnson hesitated, then nodded. "We analyzed the security footage from the hospital and the financial transactions made in the days preceding the kidnapping. There is strong evidence suggesting this was an inside job." "What kind of evidence?" asked Michael, his body tensing. "Your brother Richard made several large cash withdrawals in the days before the kidnapping. He also contacted a private security company with known links to international mercenary groups." Johnson paused, clearly uncomfortable with what would come next. "And most incriminating, he secretly took out a huge life insurance policy on the children, with himself as the sole beneficiary in case something happened to them." Michael visibly paled. "Are you suggesting that my own brother—" "There's more," Emily unexpectedly interrupted, her voice small but firm. "The man who was with you on television behind you, he was the same man I saw watching when I found the babies." All heads turned to her. "What do you mean?" Johnson asked intensely. "When I found them in the dumpster, there was a black car parked nearby. There was a man inside watching, and later, when you were on TV offering the reward, he was behind you, but his eyes didn't show concern. Mrs. Thompson noticed it too." "Mrs. Thompson?" asked Johnson. "The elderly lady who helped us escape," explained Emily, feeling a lump in her throat. "The men broke into her apartment when we were there. She stayed behind to give us time to flee. Is she okay?" Johnson's expression softened somewhat. "She's here at the hospital. She received a blow to the head, but she'll recover. It was she who gave us the description of the men, which matches known associates of the security company that your brother hired." Michael seemed completely devastated. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would Richard do this? They're innocent babies, his own nieces." Johnson exchanged meaningful looks with the federal agents present. "We believe it has to do with the new cancer treatment your company announced. If it's approved, several large pharmaceutical companies will lose billions, and we've discovered that your brother has secret investments in 3 of the major companies that would be affected." "Was he willing to kill children for money?" asked Michael, horrified. "His own nieces?" Before anyone could answer, the door to the room was abruptly opened. Richard Thompson stood in the doorway, 2 hospital security guards trying unsuccessfully to restrain him. "Thank God they're all right," exclaimed Richard, his tone almost convincing, although his eyes were restless, moving rapidly around the room, noting the federal agents and the expression on his brother's face. "I came as soon as I knew they had been found." "How did you know, Richard?" Michael asked coldly. "We haven't released the news yet." Richard hesitated a moment. A contact in the police informed me. That doesn't matter now. What's important is that they're safe." "Safe from whom?" asked Michael, his voice gaining strength. "Safe from the men you hired to kidnap them, or perhaps to kill them?" Richard's face changed, his mask of concern falling to reveal something colder and more calculating. "You don't understand, Michael. The company was at risk. That cancer treatment would have saved millions of lives," completed Michael, the anger evident in every word. "Which was more important than the billions it would cost the companies you secretly invested in?" Richard took a step back, sensing he was trapped. The federal agents were already moving in his direction. "You were always the favorite," spat Richard, all pretense of brotherly love disappearing. "Always the genius, the visionary, while I took care of the finances, the real work. That treatment would have ruined everything, not just my investments, but the entire structure of the pharmaceutical industry. Some lives need to be sacrificed for the greater good." "Lives of babies?" questioned Michael, incredulous. "Your own nieces?" Richard didn't answer. Instead, in a quick and desperate move that no one had foreseen, he pulled out a weapon from inside his jacket and pointed it at the cribs. "If I can't have what I want," he shouted, "neither will you." Everything happened in seconds. Emily, who had remained quietly observing, moved with the speed that only years on the streets could teach. She threw herself between Richard and the cribs, putting her small body as a shield for the babies. "You won't hurt them," she screamed, her eyes fixed on Richard's without fear. "Not now, not ever." Richard hesitated for a crucial moment, surprised by the little girl's courage. And that moment was all the federal agents needed. They quickly overpowered him, the gun falling to the floor with a metallic thud. While Richard was handcuffed and taken out, shouting threats and accusations, Michael ran to Emily, taking her in his arms. "You were going to give your life for them," he whispered, hugging her tightly. "Again. You saved them again." Emily didn't respond. The effort of the last few days, the adrenaline of the final confrontation, all of it finally caught up with her. Safe in Michael's arms, she finally allowed herself to do something she hadn't done in a very long time: cry. Cry for the fear, for the exhaustion, for the hunger, for Mrs. Thompson, and perhaps, most of all, for the uncertain future that awaited her now that her mission was complete. 6 months later, Michael Thompson's mansion was unrecognizable. What was previously a minimalist and impersonal space, designed more to impress visitors than to be a home, now overflowed with life and warmth. The vast garden, previously only decorative, now had a colorful playground with swings and slides. The pool, previously rarely used, now had a specially built shallow area for small children, and what was previously a formal office had been transformed into a playroom full of colors, books, and stuffed animals. Emily sat on a bench in the garden, watching Lily, Rose, Violet, and Poppy trying to crawl on the soft grass. At 9 months old, all 4 were developing wonderfully, each showing distinct personalities that delighted everyone around them. Lily, always the most curious, was already trying to stand up by holding onto furniture. Rose, the natural leader, crawled faster than her sisters, always at the forefront exploring new territories. Violet, the quietest, preferred to observe everything around her before acting, her green eyes attentive and intelligent. And Poppy, the most affectionate, smiled at everyone she met, spreading joy wherever she went. Michael approached, carrying a tray with juices and sandwiches. Over the past months, he had regained his healthy appearance, although his eyes carried a new depth, as if the experience of nearly losing his daughters had left a permanent mark on his soul. "Afternoon snack," he announced cheerfully, sitting next to Emily. "The chef said you need to eat more fruits, so I prepared this special sandwich with strawberries and cheese. It's a strange combination, but she swore it's nutritious." Emily smiled, accepting the sandwich. After years of eating what she found, she still found it difficult to get used to regular meals and food specially prepared for her. "Thank you," she said simply. She was still not one of many words, But Michael had learned to understand what was hidden behind her short phrases. "The adoption papers came this morning," said Michael casually, although his eyes were watching Emily attentively. "If you still want, it's official. You'll legally be my daughter, big sister to them in every sense." Emily stopped chewing, eyes wide with surprise. From the day they found the babies, Michael had insisted that Emily stay at the mansion. At first, she thought it would be temporary, just until the authorities decided which foster home to send her to this time. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Michael had enrolled Emily in a good school, provided therapy to help her process her years on the streets, hired tutors to help her catch up on lost study time. He treated her like part of the family, never as a temporary guest or worse, as some kind of heroine who deserved gratitude but not belonging. "You really want me?" asked Emily, the vulnerability of her 8 years breaking through the protective shell that years on the streets had built. Michael smiled softly. "Emily, from the moment I saw you in that hospital, protecting my daughters with your own body, I knew you were already part of this family. You loved them first. You protected them when I couldn't, and over the past 6 months, I've seen how they look at you, with absolute love and trust. This family wouldn't be complete without you." As if to confirm his words, Poppy crawled up to them and stood up using Emily's legs as support. Her green eyes sparkled with recognition and adoration as she clapped, proud of her achievement. "Look!" exclaimed Emily with a joy that was still rare in her voice. "She's almost standing by herself." Michael observed the interaction between his daughters, yes, all 5 now, feeling a gratitude that he would never be able to fully express. Fate had given him not only his 4 little ones back, but also an older daughter whose courage and love had saved the entire family. That evening, after the babies had been put to bed in their cribs, Emily helped Michael tidy up the toys scattered around the room. It was a ritual they had developed together, a quiet moment to talk about the day. "You know," said Michael as he folded a small blanket, "when people ask me about our family, I always say the same thing. It was built twice, once by birth and once by courage." Emily smiled, finally beginning to believe that some endings could really be happy, even for street children who find babies in the trash. Especially for street children brave enough to protect what they love against all odds. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, but within those walls, a family that began in tragedy and desperation had transformed into something beautiful and unbreakable, united not only by blood, but by the fierce love of a small guardian who refused to abandon 4 precious babies when the world had abandoned her. And in the room next door, Mrs. Thompson, who now lived with them as an honorary grandmother, smiled contentedly, hearing the soft voices of father and daughter. She had always believed that destiny worked in mysterious ways, uniting people who needed each other in the most unlikely moments. "Family," Mrs. Thompson whispered to herself as she fell asleep, "is not just who gives you life, but who teaches you how to live it." Emily's integration into Michael Thompson's world was not without challenges. After 3 years of living on the streets, the transition to a mansion with rules, schedules, and social expectations was like learning a new language, confusing, frustrating, and sometimes frightening. In the first weeks after the official adoption, Emily often woke up in the middle of the night in panic, looking for the babies, momentarily forgetting that they were safe in their cribs in the room next door. Other times, Michael found her sleeping on the floor beside her own bed, the mattress too soft for someone accustomed to concrete and cardboard. "It takes time," Mrs. Thompson said wisely when she found Michael worried after another night when Emily had barely slept. "Her body gets used to comfort quickly. It's the mind that needs more time to believe that this won't suddenly disappear." School was another challenge. Despite her natural intelligence, Emily was years behind academically. Michael hired private tutors to help her catch up on lost time, but the anxiety of being in a classroom surrounded by other children was overwhelming. "I don't want to go," Emily declared in her 3rd week, arms crossed, small chin raised in defiance. They stare at me all the time. They laugh when I don't know the answers. One girl asked if I was really your daughter or just an employee. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, visibly distressed. As CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, he was used to solving complex problems, but the challenge of helping a child adapt socially seemed infinitely more difficult. "Maybe I should talk to these children's parents," he began. But Emily shook her head. "That would only make things worse," she said, with the wisdom of someone who had learned to navigate hostile environments. On the streets, when someone bothers you and you call someone to help you, they just wait until you're alone again to come back worse. Michael recognized the truth in her words. "What do you think would work then?" Emily thought for a moment. "On the streets, you make friends when you have something others need, or when you help someone with a problem." The next day, Michael and Emily formulated a different plan. Instead of going to the regular class, Emily asked to speak to the group for 10 minutes. With the support of the teacher, who had been informed about Emily's incredible history, she told an edited version of her story, how she had found 4 babies and protected them until she found their father. "I didn't know how to take care of babies," Emily admitted to the silent class. "But I learned. Sometimes you don't need to know everything to help someone. You just need to try your best." The children were hypnotized. At the end of her account, a boy named Tyler raised his hand. "My mom had a baby last month, and even she doesn't know what to do when it cries," he said, provoking laughter in the class. "You must be very brave." That was the beginning of a chain. Emily would never be the most popular student, but she gained respect. And weeks later, when she helped Tyler with a science project about recycling, a topic she knew intimately from her days collecting recyclable materials, she also gained her first true friend. At home, the routine was gradually established. Michael adapted his work schedule to be present every morning and evening. Thompson Innovations now operated with a new model, a CEO who prioritized family as much as business. This created waves in the corporate world, but to the surprise of many, productivity and employee morale improved when they saw the boss modeling a balance between work and personal life. The quadruplets grew rapidly, reaching developmental milestones with a synchronicity that fascinated the doctors. When Lily took her first steps at 10 months old, her sisters followed within days. When Rose said her first word, "Daddy," the others quickly developed their own initial vocabularies. And through it all, Emily was there, helping with feedings, holding unsteady hands during first steps, reading stories before bedtime. Her relationship with each of her sisters was unique and special. With Lily, she shared a natural curiosity about how things worked. With Rose, she learned about leadership and confidence. With Violet, she enjoyed quiet moments of observation and reflection. And with Poppy, she rediscovered the simple joy of smiling and laughing for no reason. When the baby's first birthday approached, Michael planned a celebration that would reflect the extraordinary journey of their family. It wouldn't be an extravagant party typical of billionaires, with paparazzi and celebrities. Instead, it would be an intimate gathering, just with people who truly mattered. The day dawned sunny, perfect for the small celebration in the garden. Colorful balloons and ribbons decorated the trees, and a simple but elegant table was prepared with a cake and snacks. Mrs. Thompson had spent days preparing special dishes from her homeland, including cakes that Emily had helped prepare, feeling important with the task of trust. The guests were few but significant. Detective Johnson, who had become friends with the family, Agent Miller, who occasionally visited to see the girls she had helped save, Mr. Davis from the store, whose discretion and kindness had been crucial in the early days, Tyler and his parents, who had welcomed Emily as part of their own social life, and a few close employees of Thompson Innovations who had supported Michael during the crisis. When the time came to sing Happy Birthday, Michael took a microphone and asked for everyone's attention. 1 year ago, he began, his voice broken with emotion, "our family faced the greatest crisis we could imagine. My daughters were taken from me, and for 3 days I thought I had lost them forever." He paused, looking at the 4 girls sitting in their high chairs, each with a small, colorful birthday hat. They clapped and smiled, unaware of the deep significance of that day. "What I didn't know," continued Michael, "was that a guardian angel was watching over them. An 8-year-old girl, living on the streets with nothing more than courage and a huge heart, found my daughters and protected them when all my money and power couldn't do it." He extended his hand toward Emily, who approached shyly, holding tightly to his arm. "Today, we're not just celebrating the first year of life for Lily, Rose, Violet, and Poppy. We're celebrating the first year of our complete family, a family that destiny built in ways we could never have imagined." Silent tears ran down the faces of those present. Even Detective Johnson, known for his professional stance, discreetly wiped his eyes. "And we celebrate courage," concluded Michael, looking at Emily with immense pride. "The courage of a girl who never had anything, but still gave everything to save 4 babies she didn't even know." Emily, usually shy in public, surprised everyone by taking the microphone. "I had nothing," she said simply, her voice small but clear. "But when I found them, suddenly I had everything. I had someone to care for, someone who needed me." She looked at her sisters, smiling with that rare smile that lit up her whole face. "Now I know that family is not just who gives you food and a roof. Family is who gives you a reason to be brave." The party continued with the joy and chaos typical of any celebration with 4 one-year-old girls. Cakes were smashed on small faces, gifts were torn with enthusiasm, and laughter filled the garden until dusk. That evening, after the guests had left and the children had been put to bed, Michael found Emily sitting on the terrace, observing the stars that were finally visible from the top of the hill where the mansion was located. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her. Emily smiled at the expression she had recently learned. "I was thinking that the stars look different from here. On the streets, with all the city lights, you can barely see them." Michael nodded, following her gaze to the night sky. "I was also thinking about the girl's mom," continued Emily, surprising Michael. "What was she like?" Michael took a deep breath. It was a topic they rarely discussed. Catherine, his late wife, had died during the birth of the quadruplets due to rare complications. The tragedy had deeply shaken Michael, and Richard had used his grief as an opportunity to implement his plan. "Catherine was extraordinary," Michael finally said. "Intelligent, kind, and incredibly strong. When we discovered we would have quadruplets, the doctors offered what they called selective reduction, keeping only 1 or 2 babies to reduce the risks. Catherine immediately refused. She said that each life was already a miracle and that we would find a way to care for them all." Emily absorbed the information in silence. "I think she would be happy that they have a big sister now." Michael hugged Emily, kissing the top of her head. "I'm sure she would have adored you, Emily, and would be as proud as I am." 2 years passed from the baby's first birthday. Life in the Thompson home had found its rhythm. Chaotic, noisy, but full of love. The quadruplets, now 3 years old, were little tornadoes of energy, each with personalities that became more evident every day. Lily was the family scientist, always taking apart toys to see how they worked. Rose organized her sisters in elaborate games where she, naturally, was always the leader. Violet spent hours in her little corner of the library, leafing through picture books and inventing stories. Poppy was the artist, covering the walls and occasionally the furniture with colorful drawings that Michael didn't have the heart to remove. Emily, now 10 years old, was flourishing in ways that surprised everyone. Academically, she had exceeded all expectations, catching up on lost time with a determination that impressed her teachers. Socially, she was still reserved, but had formed a small circle of loyal friends who completely accepted her. But not everything was perfect. Richard Thompson's trial had dominated the headlines for months, exposing sordid details of his conspiracy and shaking public confidence in Thompson innovations. Although Michael had implemented radical changes in company transparency, the scandal still cast a shadow over his work. One Sunday morning, while the girls were playing in the garden under Mrs. Thompson's supervision, Michael found Emily in the library, focused on a business book, clearly too advanced for her age. "Heavy reading for a weekend," he commented, sitting next to her. Emily carefully marked the page. "I'm trying to better understand how companies work. Because of the problems with Thompson Innovations." Michael blinked, surprised. Although he didn't hide professional difficulties from Emily, he didn't discuss the details with her either, wanting to protect her from additional worries. "How do you know about that?" Emily shrugged. "I hear things, and I also research on the internet. At school, some kids said the company has problems because of Uncle Richard." Michael sighed. Of course, Emily absorbed more than she showed. Her years on the streets had made her incredibly perceptive. "Yes, we are facing some challenges," he admitted. "When someone in a position of power does something wrong, it takes time for people to trust again. It's like..." He searched for an analogy that would make sense to a child. "Like when I came to school," Emily surprisingly completed. "No one trusted me at first because I was different. I had to show who I really was, one day at a time." Michael smiled, once again amazed by his oldest daughter's wisdom. "Exactly like that. And that's what we're doing with the company. One day at a time, showing that we are trustworthy." Emily closed the book. "The new cancer medicine that you created, it will still help people, right?" "Yes," Michael assured. "In fact, tomorrow we'll announce something important about this. We've just received final approval for large-scale distribution. We'll be able to provide the treatment to people who could never afford traditional alternatives." Emily nodded, satisfied. "So, Uncle Richard didn't win? He wanted to prevent it, but he couldn't." Michael felt a tug in his chest, thinking about his brother, now serving a long prison sentence. The betrayal still hurt, but he had learned to move forward, focusing on the good his company could do. "No, he didn't win," agreed Michael. "And do you know why? Because people like you, Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Davis, and so many others chose to do what was right, even when it was difficult. In the end, that's what always wins." The next day, Thompson Innovations made its historic announcement. The new cancer treatment would be available at 1/10 the price of conventional therapies, and a special program would guarantee free access for patients without resources. The stock market reacted positively, and for the first time in 2 years, the Thompson name appeared in the headlines for positive reasons. That afternoon, when Emily returned from school, she found a small package on her bed. Inside was a simple but elegant necklace with 5 small colored stones. "One for each of us," explained Michael, entering the room. "Green for Lily, pink for Rose, purple for Violet, red for Poppy, and blue for you. Because today, when we announce something that will help thousands of people, I wanted to remind you that none of this would have been possible without what you did 2.5 years ago." Emily touched the stones gently, feeling the weight of their significance. "I didn't do anything special," she murmured, "just what anyone would have done." "No," Michael disagreed softly. "You did what very few people would do. You saw 4 defenseless lives and chose to protect them, even when it put your own life at risk. And every day since then, you continue to choose love and family above everything. This necklace is to remind you, and remind me too, that the greatest acts of heroism usually come from the smallest hands." 7 years later, the school auditorium was full for the middle school graduation. Proud parents held flowers and cameras, trying to capture every moment of the ceremony. On stage, the principal was giving her traditional speech about new beginnings and bright futures. In the third row, 4 identical 10-year-old girls were trying to sit still and miserably failing. Their matching dresses in different shades of the same color only increased the impression that they were copies of each other, although anyone who knew them could easily identify them by their distinct personalities. "When is she going to speak?" whispered Lily, adjusting the glasses she had recently started wearing. "Patience," replied Violet, always the voice of calm. "Emily is the class speaker. She'll be last before the diplomas are handed out." "I hope she's not nervous," commented Poppy, playing with a friendship bracelet she had made especially for the occasion. "It's Emily," declared Rose with conviction. "She's never nervous." Michael Thompson, sitting next to his daughters, smiled hearing the comment. If only they knew how many nights Emily had spent practicing her speech, worried about finding the perfect words. Mrs. Thompson, now almost 80 years old but still vigorous, squeezed Michael's hand. "She'll do fine," she whispered. "Our girl always does fine." Finally, the principal announced, "And now I have the pleasure of presenting this year's class speaker, a student who exemplifies what it means to overcome challenges and pursue excellence. Please welcome Emily Wilson." The applause was enthusiastic, but no one clapped louder than the 4 girls in the 3rd row, who were practically jumping in their seats with excitement. Emily walked to the podium, her confident posture hiding any nervousness she might feel. At 17, she'd become an impressive young woman, tall, with long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a face that, though it rarely smiled in public, radiated a quiet strength. "When I was asked to make this speech," began Emily, her clear voice reaching the back of the auditorium, "I was thinking what to say that wouldn't sound like all the graduation speeches we've already heard, so I decided to talk about something that we all face. Defining moments." She paused, looking at her family in the front rows. "We all have moments in life that change everything. Moments when we make a decision that defines who we are and who we'll become. For some, that moment might be deciding to study for a difficult exam instead of giving up. For others, it might be standing up for someone being bullied, even when it would be easier to look the other way." Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "My defining moment came when I was 8 years old. I lived on the streets, surviving day by day, focused only on my own survival. Then, on a rainy night, I found 4 abandoned babies." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Although many vaguely knew the Thompson family's story, few had heard the details directly from Emily. "In that moment, I had to choose. Ignore what I saw and go on my way, or take on a responsibility that could put my own life at risk. I chose responsibility. I chose love." She looked directly at her 4 sisters, who were watching her with identical eyes, full of admiration. What I didn't know was that choice wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Each day since then has brought new defining moments. Choosing to trust when everything in me said to distrust. Choosing to learn when it seemed easier to give up. Choosing to forgive when anger seemed more justified. Emily smiled then, one of those rare smiles that completely transformed her face. "What I've learned is that it's not the big dramatic moments that define who we are. It's the sum of all the small choices we make day after day. It's choosing kindness when no one is watching. It's choosing hard work when no one is applauding. It's choosing integrity when it would be easier to compromise." She looked at her classmates, her gaze passing over each row. "As we move on to high school and beyond, we will face many more defining moments. And I want you all to know that we shouldn't fear these choices. Each of us has more strength, more courage, and more capability than we imagine. I was just a hungry and cold street child, but I found the strength to protect 4 lives. You too will find your strength when you need it." Emily paused, looking directly into the eyes of her classmates, her voice gaining an intensity that made everyone in the auditorium lean forward. "So today, I'm giving you all an invitation. Look for opportunities to be the hero in someone's story. It doesn't have to be something grand like saving lives. It can be as simple as noticing someone alone in the cafeteria and offering them a place at your table, or standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Sometimes a small act of kindness can change someone's entire world. I know because I've seen it happen. And you never know when your moment to make a difference will come. Michael couldn't contain the tears as he listened to his oldest daughter speak with such maturity and wisdom. The quadruplets were equally moved, even Rose, who generally considered public displays of emotion embarrassing. So as we celebrate today, continued Emily, I want each of you to remember, it doesn't matter where we come from. What matters is where we're going, and the path to get there is built one choice at a time. The applause was deafening when she finished. The quadruplets jumped from their seats, shouting, "That's our sister," with a pride that made several parents around smile indulgently. Later, during the small celebration at home, Emily found a moment of tranquility in the garden, away from the bustle of the party. Michael found her there, sitting on the same bench where years earlier she had watched her sisters learning to crawl. "Your speech was incredible," he said, sitting beside her. Emily smiled. "Thank you. I was nervous. It didn't show." "I learned from you," she replied. "Pretend to be confident until it becomes real." Michael laughed. One of many business lessons that apply to life. They sat in silence for a moment, observing the sun beginning to set over the well-tended garden. "Have you ever thought," Emily finally asked, "how everything would have been different if I hadn't passed through that alley that night?" Michael considered the question. "I think about it more often than I'd like to admit, but then I remember what Mrs. Thompson always says about destiny, that some people are meant to meet, no matter how improbable the circumstances." Emily nodded, thoughtful. "I think she's right, because it wasn't just a coincidence that I gave the girls exactly the same names you had chosen. It was as if, somehow, we were already a family before we even knew each other." On the other side of the garden, the four girls ran and laughed, their voices filling the air with a joy that not even the darkest moments of the past could diminish. "Family," said Michael, echoing the words that Mrs. Thompson so often repeated, "is not just who gives you life, but who teaches you how to live it." Emily rested her head on her father's shoulder. "And who chooses to love you, even when it's not necessary." Nerod. The sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the city, other children struggled on the streets as Emily once did. But thanks to a foundation she had helped create with part of her allowance over the years, some of those children would find shelter, food, and a chance to choose a different path. Because Emily Wilson knew, better than most, that sometimes all a person needs is a chance to show courage, to give love, to find a family. A chance she received on a rainy night when four little faces looked at her from a dumpster and changed her destiny forever. Looking at the four girls playing in the garden, Emily felt that certainty that had been growing within her for years, that our true strength doesn't lie in our power, money, or status, but in the courage to reach out when we see someone who needs help. That a single act of kindness can trigger a wave of change that extends far beyond what we can see. "So," Michael asked softly, "what do you plan to do after high school? Are you still thinking about studying social work?" Emily smiled, that rare and luminous smile that transformed her face. "Yes," she answered, "because every child deserves a champion, someone who never gives up on them and who insists that they can be more than their circumstances, exactly like what happened to me." Did this story touch your heart? If so, don't forget to like, comment on which part moved you the most, and share with friends and family. Stories like this need to be spread to inspire more people. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, click on the subscription button and activate the bell to be notified about our next exciting stories. To support our work and get access to exclusive content, consider becoming a channel member. Thank you very much for joining us this far, and remember, small acts of kindness can change the world.